Today, I sat down with none other than Eli Engelberg, one of the co-founders of SellerSnap, an Amazon AI automated repricer focused on helping resellers maximize their profitability by winning the buy box. Now, our conversation touched on obviously what their product is, but we talked largely about the inception of the business and effectively how he became an accidental entrepreneur, building a business that has grown for the last 5 years and on a really healthy trajectory. I think for anyone who's looking to step out into the world of entrepreneurship, it's really interesting to see all the different aspects that exist. You don't have to come with a plan or a goal set in mind and drive after it. There's plenty of different ways that you can find your way into this journey. And Eli's story is one that I think doesn't get enough attention. So have a listen. Enjoy as always. Thanks a lot. Welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I talk to world-class professionals on what it takes to scale successful businesses. I dive deep asking questions to people who are running unicorn businesses, to raising funds, to buying businesses, mergers and acquisitions, IP and patent law, what is to manage performance management. I mean, the list goes on. The idea really is, how do I create knowledge and learning for you guys listening in? And of course, myself, getting the floor with people who I, in many cases, would never dream to share a room with. Before we jump into the episode, I've got to give a special thank you to our sponsors. Firstly, over at Global Wide Advisors, a leading digital consumer products investment bank focused on optimizing the sales process. An incredible team, always happy to pick up the phone and educate you or anyone about the sales process and what you should really consider, and can obviously help take you to market or even acquire businesses. I ring them for just about everything these days. Us over at Multiply Me, we are the end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines, helping find better talent and onboarding them effectively. And last but not least, Escala, our management consultancy focused on process improvement, where we help build better systems for your business. That's all the ads you're going to get from me, ladies and gentlemen. The rest is all about learning. I hope you really enjoy and get as much out of these sessions as I do, sitting face to face with some of the world-renowned leaders in their respective fields, asking them the tough questions that they're not often asked. All right, Eli, welcome to an episode of Successful Scales.
Thanks.
It's great to have you. Obviously, I'm very fortunate that I get to spend a fair bit of time with you, both of us working out of the same co-working space in WeWork here in Tel Aviv. And, you know, I love every opportunity I get to sit and see just how far you've taken SellerSnap and how the team has grown. But before we dive into anything that's related to SellerSnap or a lot of the interesting things that I think we can cover, especially just given the fact that we know each other so well, I'd love you to tell those listening at home who don't know who you are a little bit about you and, a little bit about your story.
So really, my background isn't, it's a mix of things. I studied law and economics in the university. I actually worked as a lawyer in Israel, doing mostly corporate law and like financial issues and things like that. But it wasn't for me, but it did teach me a lot about that side of the business. But before that, I think most of my experience was in tech, specifically in R&D, and mainly in different QA, quality assurance roles. Varying from General Electric healthcare, medical systems, to ad tech, and I think before starting with SellerSnap, the whole e-commerce and Amazon specifically area, pricing analytics and all that stuff. So that's my background, without going into why we started SellerSnap.
I knew that you weren't going to talk yourself up too much, but I mean, just having a law and economics degree, having worked in that space, I mean, these are like fundamental building blocks. I'm not like a huge believer in college degrees unless they're really specialized, or, it's a specialized skill set that, industrial engineering. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Architecture, whatever. I think any engineer plus, and specific roles, doctor, obviously. But when it comes to things outside of that, I feel like law is probably one of the best bases to give you like a really healthy commercial acumen. And everyone that I see that comes from a background like that and then takes that journey into the entrepreneurial world typically has a pretty solid base. So, I knew you'd sell yourself short, but interesting. How'd you find your way into R&D? Like, what was the driver or into technology in general?
This is like ages ago. This is around the year 2000. Just looking for like a job before starting university, and just a neighbor of mine worked for GE in QA, and I kind of saying how it's a great job, pays well and everything, and just by coincidence I got into that because I have a bit of I think a bit of a skill for or like I'm good with tech. I'm good with computers, and so I kind of landed that job. And this is a long time ago. Nothing was very developed back then. So this is kind of this is introduction. It wasn't anything deliberate or something that was planned. It was just like a way to make some money before university.
Yeah, and
that kind of yeah.
I mean, we all start somewhere, and those experiences sometimes, while just maybe a before college experience, turn to sort of shape the foundations of our careers in some ways. And I definitely I've had through my career many things like that, moments like that, where I didn't realize how valuable it would be until a future state or a future situation. So we find ourselves today where you are one of the founders and the CEO over at SellerSnap. I could probably give it a run here and say that it's a AI powered automated Amazon repricer, but leveraging game theory as well. You can't forget that. And that's right. So I think how would I go selling in the SellerSnap business model?
It's pretty much it. It's what, well, this, but I'll go over it. The whole starting of SellerSnap is really a series of coincidence and just kind of different blocks falling into place at the right time. So I was working for another company in this field as first as QA manager and then as a product manager. And I was let go from that company. I kind of struggled to see what I'm going to do next. And I found a job as a product manager for another company in that field, and that didn't work out because they didn't get funding, and it's a typical startup story. But that is where I met. Again, we're talking about just like the coincidence or not coincidence or fate, if you want to call it that, where I met my two co-founders, Yuval Kaufman and Joshua Beam, who both worked in that company and was like had experience with Amazon and such. And when we found ourselves without a job again, we said, well, we know enough now. We see that the solutions out there aren't that great. We know how to do a better job at it. So we have ideas of what we would do different to provide a better product. And we just set out and we said, okay, we're going to do it. So set out and do it. It was
So I always find the founder story or how something was created, and this is going back, I think about 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, for you guys. What was that? Who was the driving? I mean, firstly, each of you have different skill sets, and I think that's always critical when you're bringing something off the ground that doesn't exist. Having players that can step into each of the different core functions is key, and the more the merrier, as long as you're aligned. But what was that like? Like, what was that shift of you've gone from being a product manager to a second-time product manager? Clearly, it sounds to me like you're enjoying the role. And I'll tell you, I mean, when I speak to your team, they always say that you have a real gift for product creation. Like, that's your creative or your unique genius, is your ability to actually build product. And so that clearly is your skill set. Talk to me a little bit about Joshua and obviously Yuval.
So the way this worked out was, again, it's in terms of timeline, Joshua and I were laid off the same day. And giving credit to the founder of that company, when we had this talk, he told me, listen, I think you guys should pursue this. I don't have any I don't have any objection to it. I think you can do it. It's not, we don't have the money, we can't focus on it. And my initial response was, yeah, right. Where am I gonna, how am I gonna start a company all of a sudden? But really, the same day, I gave Joshua a call and said, listen, what do you think about it? What do you think about it? And he immediately said yes. So he said, yes, I wanted, for many years that I wanted to do this. I can't do it by myself. I kind of need a partner, which is the same for me. I'm not the person that can kind of set everything up myself. And that was it. We immediately got going. And again, it's a very convenient starting point, because what Josh and I and Yuval spent the last kind of 3 months on was developing a better Amazon repricer. And so when we were cut loose from that company, all the discussions we had, all the thoughts, all the ideas was still there. And then I remember initially Josh said, yeah, I have the skill to, he's a developer, said I have the skill to develop everything. We keep something up and running within, a couple of months. I told him this, I didn't see any way that was going to happen. And took him about a week or so to see all the requirements and say, yeah, we're over our heads. And we said, okay, we'll bring someone else in. And he suggested Yuval. And at that point, Yuval was laid off. And now I met Yuval. He wanted to think about it like for 1 day or so, but he took the opportunity as well. And that's kind of where we got started.
And I think like one of the critical things, and as I go through it as well, it's the people that you work with is the most important thing. And to have built that solid foundation and sort of had 3 months. I know you probably worked together potentially for longer, but you had at least 3 months of all working together and getting to feel each other out. It's a healthier engagement than picking sort of someone who's untried and untested and someone that you don't know whether it's really going to be a fit.
Well, to be honest, we really hardly knew each other. I knew Josh a little bit better than Yuval because I worked more with Josh. Yuval later decided he didn't even like me when we were working together at the other company. But I think the basics, like the basic character of each one of us was such that we did trust each other, and that has never been broken. So there's never been a case where someone trying to screw someone else over. That's like we had, and so we needed very little in terms of legal documents or anything like that. We just we trusted each other. We just went and did it, and it's. And in that early stage, everyone contributed because Josh did run his own company in the US, so he was good at kind of setting up the the more operational or legal side of things, setting up a bank account and registering all sorts of stuff. And both Yuval and Josh had the development experience, and I had the product experience of what we wanted, and so we kind of had everything, or the core ingredients to at least have an MVP ready, and the rest was going to follow.
So did you guys have in that moment like a set goal of any sort, or we're going to try this for X number of months, or what was the driving sort of expectation against one another in those early stages? And I asked that question because for a lot of founders that go through that journey and they go to start their first startup, or they find themselves in a position where they effectively have some unique IP and unique insights and come together. Like how did you guys look at it?
There was nothing. There was really just us knowing the market we were going to operate in, and understanding the other players in that market, understanding that there is a big gap. So there's no one good solution that is priced right, that gives the functionality that the sellers need. And and so just from our experience, again, we said, okay, we know how to do this much better. So at no point did we have much doubt that we can build a product that will show some value, even if it doesn't, even if it's not without flaws, that it will be at least as good and in many cases better than the other solutions out there. And kind of in terms of milestones and things like that, that was also something that people kept asking, okay, what is like, where do you stop, or where do you make a decision if you're moving ahead or not? And again, what worked for us is we never had that. We said we'll just reevaluate any single moment in time. As long as things are moving in the right direction, we're going to pursue this. And if things stop moving in the right direction, or we can't grow, or we're like at a point where we say, listen, there's no chance, or it's not working, we'd give it up. But as long as, even if we're not making money yet, as long as there's progress and we understand what we're doing, we're just going to keep doing it as long as we can, which is what we did.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worked out, and we'll get into sort of the more current day landscape. But again, this entrepreneur's journey is always something that fascinates me, because I think for a lot of people, it's either not being able to pull the trigger and start, or leaving something too long, or not reassessing at the right times. And you guys have clearly made some great decisions over the course of the history of the business. My sort of question to you here is, how did you approach winning or gaining your first sales? Like, that's usually the hardest thing. You don't have, an audience.
Again, well, here again, I'm not gonna start telling stories about how great we were at marketing and stuff. It's a series of events and blocks that fell into place. So again, we were doing something. We didn't go out to produce or develop a product that didn't exist, or try to invent a new market. This is just a market that existed already. There are solutions out there for repricing for Amazon sellers. The sellers were there, and at this point, mostly Josh had a company that kind of did custom development for Amazon sellers. So he knew Amazon sellers as customers of his. And that was enough to kind of connect to the few first sellers that were happy to work with us on a beta version. That first connection just came from Josh's relationship with Amazon sellers, and a bit of an interesting story, or a funny story, was that actually our first paying customer was someone that Yuval picked up in a cafe in Tel Aviv. Yuval really has no limits, talking to people about anything. And he overheard someone talking about Amazon at the next table, and he just approached him and said, you're selling on Amazon? Really? We have a solution, blah, blah, blah. Got him on board. And that company became our first paying customer.
Yeah.
By the way, I never saw it coming, by the way. I thought they'd never pay and whatever. And at a certain point, we decided, okay, we need to start charging. And we told the users, and they said, fine. And they started paying.
I have a feeling
just coincidence, nothing. Yeah.
I have a feeling that client is one of the Israeli aggregators, if I'm not mistaken. Which is hilarious.
Yeah. And it's not an aggregator. They have a bit of a different model, but yeah. And I think they're doing very well. They've been with us. They're our longest customer. They're the first customer, are still with us. Again, just pure chance in that sense. It's not like if Yuval wouldn't have talked to him, we had later on, a couple of weeks later, another customer joined us who was like one of Josh's connections. And after one or two, we started to reach out a little bit, and it just started kind of dripping in very slowly in the beginning.
Which is generally the case, unless you've got an aggressive salesperson that's
again. So this goes to the whole funding thing. So as you mentioned, we are bootstrap. Which I think is becoming more common, and it works well for our type of company. If you're a SaaS company, if you don't need to set up like a production line and manufacture things and have invest a lot of money in whatever it is, inventory, or you can do it if in the core team you have the skill set, which we did, because I knew enough about the product and everything, and both Yuval and Josh are developers. And so really, yes, we didn't have a marketing expert, we didn't have a sales manager, we didn't have a bunch of things, but all those things are kind of, you can do that yourself. You can't if you're not a developer, you're not going to develop the code yourself. But if you're not a salesperson, you can still sell your own product if you believe in it. So that's and that's kind of what worked for us. Does that
ever, like, I know we talk about it, we sit down every month or so, and we often have chats around, like, there's so much capital being raised. There's, it's not free, but there's money flowing around everywhere. And it seems like there's never been an easier time to get your hands on money these days. I wonder, and I think these are the things that founders going through this process maybe don't sit and consider. What are the implications? But I feel like you're the kind of person who's really thought through the why you would or wouldn't. So run me through a little bit around your decisions. You guys have decided not to raise, and I've seen the growth with my own two eyes over the last 2-3 years.
Again, you're too kind. The same pattern follows here: coincidence or fate. No, we didn't decide not to raise money. We just didn't get funded. So in the beginning, I was like reaching out to local VCs and private investors and such. But either the case we're making wasn't as interesting at least for the venture capital kind of model, and B, I'm not I'm not a good salesperson when it comes to selling the company. So we didn't get funded. Everyone told us, look, it's very interesting. You seem like a great team and everything, but we don't see the big potential in it. And so maybe it's a great business for you guys, but it's not interesting. So it's not like we set off to say we're going to do this bootstrap, we don't need funding. Actually, that's where I think we disagreed a little bit. I was the one that said, no, we have to have funding. There's no way we're going to do this without money. And Josh and Yuval said, no, maybe we don't need funding. And really, this wasn't a decision. It's just at a certain point, I just gave up on talking to investors. And I think that became very clear when we started getting more paying customers. It was like, okay, we'll start doing it. We'll continue doing it this way. And grow organically. And again, luckily, the initial growth was fast enough so that we can start having like a viable business that can pay salaries and at least in the beginning, nothing fancy, but good enough to be sustainable.
Do you ever take moments in time where you look back and you think, like, look at what we've created, look at what we've actually been able to. You have a team of, I don't know, 15, 20 now. You've built, people rely on you for their livelihood, and the team continues to grow. Like, I'm saying this from the standpoint of someone who very rarely takes a second to appreciate and think like, wow, look what you've been able to do. But I wonder, have there ever been moments throughout this journey where, like, the three of you are on a salary that is now, I'm still not quite there, but the three of you are on a salary where you're like, wow, I'm living on a really healthy salary and we've been able to create this? Like, do you ever have those moments in time?
We have them. I remember we had the first kind of significant point was when we hired our first person, which is actually Lucy Madison. We found her to be the first account manager, and she was actually the first person we hired, and we paid her. We paid herself a salary which is much lower than hers. She obviously got more money at that point, but that was a point where we're like, wow, we can actually pay someone their market value, and they'll come work for us and do a good job and help grow. So that was kind of a first step, and then as we grew, we were able to start paying ourselves a decent salary and also be able to recruit more people and also be able to compensate them accordingly. And so do we have a specific? No, it's all the time. We understand, like, we're happy with what we did, and it's certainly not something that we don't overlook. We know that we're very happy with the point we're at. I don't remember exactly when it happened. It's a journey, right, over 5 years. I would say about kind of 3 years ago was when we were at a point where this was like no longer a startup that's kind of like, barely making it, but it's like a business, a viable business. It's growing, and that can, hire more people and just be a good, just a good business.
Yeah, well, congratulations, and obviously super super exciting to be able to have done that and to continue to add a ton of value. We talk a lot about, and you and I mean, we get along great, but we definitely have different views when it comes to how we look to operate our businesses. Obviously, I'm very much about SOPs and process, and trying to build a huge company with lots of people. And you guys take a different approach, where it's more so, I would describe it as 100% product or client first, where it's really on how do we simply add value, which obviously we do as well. But I'm trying to build sort of, we're people driven. It's a service versus a SaaS. They're very different businesses. But I think in terms of your philosophy, it's very much about win-win. I mean, you guys have great structures around how you compensate your team members, and you make it very much about everyone wins together. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your management style, or rather like how you look at the business operation. I'm just going to put it out there. You guys don't really look at hard numbers and KPIs. That's not the thing. You don't have sales guys that have targets and things like that. That's just not the DNA of SellerSnap. So yeah, talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, it's first of all, it boils down to my personality, and also the fact that my experience was always as like an employee for another company until SellerSnap. So I was never in that position of making decisions. I think that gave me the experience of what someone who works for a tech company feels, how they feel, or what might bother them. And I think a lot of those life lessons lead to the decision making I do now. And so that's one part of it. The other thing is, again, personality. I'm not a very organized guy that likes standard procedures and things like that. It's just not me. That's not to say that it's not important. And I think in SellerSnap now we are doing that a little bit more. It's just being done by other people who are more good at, who are better at that. Which is fine. I think I don't mind. It's our company, and as CEO is just like the title. Obviously, I wouldn't be the head developer or whatever, so CEO is kind of the obvious option. But both Yuval and I, we don't need to prove ourselves to anyone, because we're not applying for a job here. But what we are doing is saying, okay, we know what we do well. Anything else, we bring in team members who excel at. And so I think the success was hiring. And again, there is a lot of luck involved, because you never know who you're going to get. But we had we had the good fortune of finding very good people, and giving them complete autonomy and the ability to grow. And they have stepped up to the occasion and done very well, and done things that I wouldn't be able to do. So our team has different roles in the team and different skill sets, and I do some things well, but every team member contributes other things that I wouldn't be able to do in any way. And I think that's where we that's I think a major part of the success of SellerSnap. So again, it's nothing new now. I think a lot of companies are very flat in their organization, and it's not like, oh, we're doing something very special. But we are very, like, everything is completely open. There is nothing behind closed doors in SellerSnap. Everyone kind of knows everything, is welcome to join any conversation. In the end, Yuval and I call the shots, but it's like always an open discussion, and it's like everyone contributes. And again, you know, in all fairness, we're still a small company, and so there's no question that what works now doesn't work if we were 200 employees. So this wouldn't
For
be,
sure.
This is not, what we're doing now isn't scalable, but it is good to build the core of a good business. We'll have to apply different things as we grow.
Well, I mean, I would say, I would counter that with saying you've built a SaaS platform, which inherently is built for scalability. So the beautiful thing about anything in the SaaS space is you don't need a 200-person team to get something of any real substance and have, you know, a really lucrative business. So, you know, if I had my time again, or, you know, maybe in my next ventures, it's really how do you build scalability or high ticket price, low volume, because there's different challenges that exist. But to go back, and for you being so humble, I mean, that in itself is a skill in picking the right people who complement the skill sets that don't exist. So even designing the organization, though, and, you know, I'm very familiar with your entire team, and, you know, you've got an incredible group of people who are all, you know, fully pot committed into the vision and into the direction of the business. And, you know, having that flat structure, which I would say we have too as well, but I mean, that's the lifeblood of it. That's what helps it drive forward. So you don't need to be an expert in everything. It's about leveraging other people's passions and having them play those roles.
This, you know, going back to what I said about my experience, my kind of career experience, that's like one of the things that I used to see in companies, and I always hate is that companies are usually not good at growing people internally. And like they'll, you know, have a team and they'll say, now we've grown, or we recruited money, now we're going to recruit someone to be the manager of this team or whatever. And I think that's, you know, usually not the best way to grow like a winning team. And what we've done is we've up to this point at least, never had to say, okay, you know, we have a team here, now we're going to, you know, bring in a manager with experience to manage them. Everyone in the team gets the like our first go-to is like to promote people within SellerSnap to do whatever they're good at, whatever their ambitions are, what they want to do. Obviously, if there's a skill that's missing and we need something from outside, we'll recruit, but that isn't the first, you know, that isn't our first resort. And I think that's, you know, the team sees that, and I think it gives a lot of confidence in for everyone personally. If they do well, or if they have certain ambitions and they want to do something, they know that they'll get that opportunity. And it's, you know, I think that has been part of why the different people in SellerSnap have been so successful at growing their job and you know, just contributing.
Absolutely. You know, that's why you guys continue to push forward. And, you know, I know that you have some interesting things under the hood right now. You guys are building additional product offerings, and I know that you're ramping up in terms of your development team. There's lots of exciting things going on, but I'd love to, you know, step into a second, talk a little bit more about SellerSnap and about the platform and about the audience. And, you know, this is an opportunity, obviously, to share with people who might not be familiar with SellerSnap a little bit more in detail about it as a solution. So who does it help? You know, what does the roadmap look like? Can you share some of the insights, anything that you can share publicly?
Oh, there's nothing of a secret. So the way we started, and that hasn't changed since, was that we're a solution for Amazon sellers, not just Amazon sellers, but Amazon Amazon resellers, or people that are competing for the buy box, so to speak. So sellers that sell competitive products and not their own brand, because that was our experience. That's all we did in the previous companies, and we didn't know anything else. We are, you know, and originally, and that still is our philosophy, is to excel at a few things that we think, we have something to contribute and we're good at, and not just try to, okay, this is not good enough, this is not enough, and expand to a bunch of different solutions and fields. Again, I think it's our experience that this usually doesn't work out well, and you can't do everything well. So it's kind of better to have an expertise. It can't be too narrow, but also not just to go off in all different directions. And so that is still the case. And so we're still, we've been able to grow the company just based on that, based on providing a repricing solution and analytics for this type of Amazon sellers. Obviously, as a business, we want to grow, and we are thinking about other revenue channels. And one of the things we're starting now is we're cooperating with Walmart, which we think is going to be just a fantastic opportunity. But again, in the same field of repricing and analytics. So we're not doing something completely different for Walmart. We're kind of trying to replicate the success we had in Amazon for another marketplace. And I don't know what else.
That's a pretty good insight there, for anyone listening in as well. Like, you guys have built your position as having AI-powered game theory repricing technology, and you've worked hard to build that IP over the course of the last 5 years. And now to replicate the model and to access new revenue streams where you're not really deviating too greatly from the initial product offering and the thing that you've worked so hard for. I mean, it becomes a really smart way to increase, the value of the business, and obviously additional revenue streams and the profitability when we talk, about SaaS business. I just sit here being jealous most of the time, everyone who has a SaaS business, and I look at how hard we have to work and where we need to get to in order for it to be a profitable business. It's a different equation. So no, I mean,
yeah, it's a different equation, but remember, this on the other hand, we're still a niche kind of product. So the customer base it's difficult to get to, and it's limited. That's one of the things, that limits us in Amazon, but there's only so many potential customers. And again, it's a competitive environment. There's other solutions out there. But yeah, pros and cons to everything.
Absolutely. Well, Eli, mate, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to come and sit here with me. It's always a pleasure. I know I'm sitting here from my home office, and you're at the office that I very rarely come into, but I just love it here. I love my space here.
I understand that.
But
hopefully next time we meet, we'll have a chance to have a drink and a cigar.
It's a must.
Yeah, it is a must. We've planned this for a while. We had to delay it a few times. I really appreciate the opportunity. No one does this better than you. So always happy to.
I think there's probably a fair few people, but I appreciate the compliment, mate. Really.
Well, I don't know many people, so I guess for all I know,
there you go. Let's
leave it at that.
That makes sense. Let's leave it at that. On that note, Eli, thanks a lot, mate. Right. I appreciate it.